Hi everybody, I'm Jason, and this is Traveling Astro. Welcome, and today I'm coming from a campground on the shores of Lake Roosevelt in eastern Washington. It's Bortle 2 skies. Tonight we're going to be shooting M45 Polaris. This video is primarily focused on beginners, or people with very little astrophotography equipment. Probably the most I would say is someone that just purchased a star tracker, something of that nature. I'm going to be using the Skywatcher Star Adventure Pro Pack. It comes with the mount head, the base, this part here with the counterweight, and this part here that the camera lens connects to. I'm also going to be using a ZWO ASI 183 planetary camera. I decided to just go with this, an uncooled version. I could have put a cooled version on there and got better the signal to noise ratio, but I wanted to keep this as simple as possible. I have a ZWO to Canon EOS lens drawer, or filter drawer. Inside I have an Astromania luminance filter, and I'm primarily using that both for focus and because it has a UV IR cut. The lens is a Rokinon 135mm f2. You can also get that in a Samyang variant, but when I looked a couple of days ago when I was in town, the Samyang oddly was more expensive than the Rokinon. I know when I bought mine, the Samyang was cheaper, but I tend to get my stuff open box. That lens was no exception, and you can get them quite a bit cheaper at that point. I have a 3D printed Astrodinium lens holder. On top of that, I have a red dot finder. And next I want to talk about focus. Alright, so I have two Botlov masks here. This one I bought off eBay, this one I bought off Etsy. That's where I bought it from. So this one, at least with the Rokinon lens, even though it said that it was designed for the Rokinon lens, it seems like I'm always slightly out of focus. I've shot with this one on this target, and that's partly why I'm doing Polaris, because it's kind of my nemesis with a camera lens, and I've screwed it up every time using this. This one, which I'm going to be using, I've always gotten in focus. It's a great Botlov mask. It does what it's supposed to, with one caveat, and it's a huge caveat. I gave them a great review when I purchased it, and I used it a few times and everything was nice and sharp. Took it up here to this very spot, and I believe it was a spring day. It was about 70 degrees outside, and they melted. Thankfully mine survived, but my brother had the exact same copy that I had purchased for him, and his was completely warped. So my recommendation with these sort of things, they're great, but if the seller doesn't say, hey, this is the material I'm using to make these out of, and do your research, the melting point especially with this stuff, don't buy it. Because obviously they're using stuff that melts at a real low temperature. Astrophotography is expensive, and you don't want this stuff melting, especially if you're traveling out. If you were going to use this in your backyard at home and take it out of the house, you'd have no problem with this. But obviously, and I wish this was my backyard, it's not my backyard, so, you know, I'm 80 miles away from home, and I can't have stuff that melts like that. And you don't want to waste your money either. But it does work, and I keep it in the cooler, actually, on ice with all the food, so it doesn't melt, and so far it's survived every trip that I've taken it on, probably because of that. For software that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be primarily using NEEWER, simply because I'm comfortable with NEEWER, but NEEWER also has a lot of cool features, like determining your rotation. You know, just one feature there. I love their flat wizard. It does really great for calibration frames. You could also use Sharp Cap. I use that for polar aligning most of the time, the Pro version. It does cost money. With NEEWER, it has a free polar aligning process. It's a 3-point polar alignment. It also works great. It's a little slower, but you can use it. I'm sure there's many other capture software out there, but just know that I'm going to be using NEEWER. And I would also recommend, if you've never done something like this and you use software, pick one that you like and start using it. Get to know where everything's located, the settings and whatnot, and by the time you do get a star tracker or a go-to mount, you should be pretty good there. You'll be able to set it up, which I will also do later videos on all that. But now we'll go to the setup. If you choose to use NEEWER and follow along, first you'll need to download it to your PC. I'll go through a few simple things to set up here, but know there are a lot of settings you can customize to your liking and needs. First, go to Plugins on your left bar. Under Available, choose 3-point polar alignment and install. Another plugin I can recommend you install if you're going to be shooting from various locations regularly is the Sights plugin. Now, either in the Sights plugin or under General Astrometry, set the sight latitude and longitude you will be shooting from. Next, go to the Equipment tab and set your lens or scope's focal length and f ratio here. Under Imaging, now set the file path for your images. Finally, under Plate Solver, which you also need to choose one or two for a blind solver and download it along with its Starbat database, make sure that it is set and its file path is set for your PC. I would recommend ASTAP for your primary solver. For setup, the first thing you want to do is know your location if possible. Ask yourself where in the sky your object will be tracking through. Do you have any obstructions? A great example is where I will be shooting from tonight. There is a huge stand of trees to my right that M45 will raise directly through, so I must get my initial position right to be able to go to my target as early as possible. In addition to this, at least for those of us in the northern hemisphere, you'll need to set up with your mount facing Polaris. Once it gets dark, you may need to adjust your mount's position if your initial positioning isn't close enough to Polaris. The question may arise for people with no experience doing this. How do you find Polaris in this mess of stars? Polaris is here, by the way. I've prepared a short visual aid that may help with that. I like to think of Polaris like the center of a clock. The Big Dipper are the hands of the clock, but it runs counterclockwise both nightly and seasonally. This example is roughly seasonally at the same time to illustrate this. Using the star Dubé, we can see how the Big Dipper rotates around Polaris counterclockwise. But also using the star Dubé, we can easily find Polaris, as no matter which position it is in. Dubé always points away to Polaris. This method has always worked well for me, at least in my location. With our mount now oriented in the correct position, we can now balance our scope or lens. First, I roughly balance the RA axis by unlocking the clutch and rotating away from the home position and sliding the weight up or down the shaft until it stays in position when I let go. Then I rotate back to the home position and unlock the declination clutch and check that the scope is balanced. If the scope falls in this position, move the scope backward or forward until it is balanced. I'll then lock the declination clutch and rotate the RA again and find balance in this position. Finally, I will unlock both clutches and check balance with the lens pointed at different angles. This is to ensure everything is balanced no matter which position the scope is in. Be gentle during this entire process and be ready to catch your scope. Now it's finally dark outside and I will roughly focus my scope. I'm only concerned at this point that the software I am using to polar align is capable of plate solving. With this setup, I will now rotate my lens in its cradle to frame the object I will be shooting tonight. I do this before polar alignment with a star tracker to help ensure that if I do accidentally bump it in such a way that it won't throw off my polar alignment later. In NEEWER, go to the Sky Atlas tab. Type in your target and hit enter. Set for framing assistant here. Now determine rotation from camera. Now rotate your camera and repeating to your liking. For polar alignment, as I said earlier in my video, I tend to use Sharp Cap simply because it tends to be faster than NEEWER, but it does cost money. I will briefly go over both here. First, in Sharp Cap, set your location. Under File, Sharp Cap Settings, click the Polar Alignment tab and enter your location. Now connect your camera and adjust your gain and exposure time with the sliders on the right. Under Tools, select Polar Alignment. Follow the instructions on the screen. Sharp Cap will take the initial image and solve it. Be aware here, you must be within about 5 degrees of Polaris for it to be successful. You then hit Next. Rotate the RA axis of your mount. Sharp Cap will then image and solve. Hit Next again. Now adjust the altitude up and down and the azimuth left and right on your mount. Get these numbers as small as possible. Try to get at least excellent here. Now NEEWER's 3-point polar alignment. Go to the Imaging tab on the left-hand side of the screen. On the tabs on the bottom of the screen, select 3-point polar alignment. Turn manual mode on as we do not have a go-to mount connected. Point your mount pretty much anywhere in the sky and turn the tracking on. I would recommend, if possible, somewhere in the vicinity of the object you will be imaging. The less you can touch these mounts after polar alignment, the better. The great thing here is you don't need line of sight with Polaris to polar align. Turn on Start from Current Location, hit the play button. NEEWER will take an image and solve. Usually while it's solving with this type of mount, I then move the RA down about 10 degrees. NEEWER will do this 3 times. Now adjust the altitude and azimuth of your mount. Again, get these numbers as small as possible. But also be aware with NEEWER, it's slower than Sharp Cap. Let it run a cycle or 2 before your next adjustment. Let's build a simple sequence to image our target through the night. Go to the Sequence tab on the left side of the screen. Hit the plus sign, Add New Target. The main setting we're concerned about here are the number of frames under total. We want this to run for the desired time on this target. Exposure length under time, usually on a star cluster, I run anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. M45 is very bright, so I'm going 30 seconds here. Gain and offset, with the 183 I set the gain for its unity gain of 120. When I first started astrophotography, I ran my gain way too high, so avoid this, and just go with unity gain. At DSLR with my 60D, I've always ran about 800 to 1600 ISO, but this varies by camera. Now I find focus. Under the Imaging tab and Imaging, I set my exposure to 2 to 4 seconds. Turn the loop on and click the shutter button. I pick a bright star in my field of view and zoom in. Putting my focus mask on, I adjust my focus until I have a well-defined X with a line going through its center. Finally, we can go to our target. M45 is rising on the eastern side of the meridian, so I will unlock the RA clutch and move the scope to the left side of the mount. If your object is setting, you will be on the right side of your mount. If you must perform a meridian flip through the night, simply flip your scope from the left side to the right and recenter. Meridian flips are so you don't crash your scope into the tripod as your object tracks and sets. Using my red dot finder, I center my object using the RA and declination screw. I don't recommend using the declination lock because it's very sticky and you can easily throw off your polar alignment. With my object centered, I again check my focus. This is very important, as you don't want to waste the entire night shooting an object out of focus. With that, I zoom in and I also visually inspect the stars, any hole in their centers, and you're out of focus. With all this complete, I now go to the imaging tab and hit the play button under sequence and shoot my target for the desired length of time. Calibration frames, to me, other than focus, are a very important step to your imaging. While taking them isn't difficult, I feel they're often the most misunderstood part of imaging. In this visual aid, I'll break down the different types of calibration frames. As far as biases are concerned, you'll only need either biases or dark flats. As for darks, some people no longer use them with newer cameras. With the 183, however, we'll still need them. For me, first up and the most important are flats. I usually take flats at the end of my imaging session, but I know some take flats at the beginning or even at home. To me, at home is a bad idea, as any shift in your imaging train can cause dust to fall, ruining your calibration frames. Just be aware that if you take them at the beginning, your rotation has to be the same as your lights. My method is simple. You'll simply need a clean white shirt. I've cut 2 shirts and can use multiple layers, and you'll need an inexpensive tracing panel. In Nina, go to your flat wizard and set how many calibration frames you want. I usually am looking for an exposure between 2 and 12 seconds. If it doesn't look like it'll fall within this range, I'll adjust my tracing panel brightness or add or remove layers of the t-shirt to get the correct brightness. If you choose dark flats over biases, Nina will then take those after the flats. You'll simply put the lens cover on and take them. In Nina, just be aware of your default gain level. If it doesn't match what you took your light exposures at, trust me on this. I have a lot of different profiles for different scopes, and I can't tell you how many times I've stumbled out of my tent at 4 a.m., took my calibration frames at the wrong gain, as I almost did here. For biases, I simply look under the camera tab for my fastest exposure. I then create another simple sequence using that exposure. I again match my gain. But with biases, I shoot a lot more of them. With the scope cap on, I usually shoot anywhere between 150 and 300 of them. The great thing with biases, however, you can reuse them as long as your lights match the gain on your biases. For darks, normally anymore, I use a cooled camera and I take them at home and just use my dark library. With an uncooled camera, however, this isn't an option. Again, I create a simple sequence. I match the exposure and gain of my lights. Again, with the scope cap on, I normally shoot anywhere between 25 and 50, depending on how long I want to stand out there half asleep. The struggle is real. So without further ado, I wanted to show you guys the results of my imaging. This was taken over 2 nights. And I only managed 2 hours of data. Like I said earlier in the video, obstructions, they can really be tough. I had it going through the tops of trees and everything else. Ended up having to move around. And this was a tough one because of that. But I gotta say, the results are stunning. I love the IFN all around it. I'm very much a proponent of natural colors and trying to get it as close to natural as possible. And I gotta say, I love this. But yeah, thanks for watching, and thank you, and clear skies.